Okay, so now it's recording. So I'm going to leave this up here for just a second to kind of walk through the first question. But if you want to have the questions in front of you, you'll want to pull out this sheet because this is going away and all you'll be seeing is my responses to these questions. All right, so the first question, we're going to assume that the United States economy is in long-run equilibrium. We don't have a recession. We don't have an inflationary gap. We're right on the money. We have an expected inflation rate of 6% and an unemployment rate of 5%. The nominal interest rate is 8%. So they've given us some vital information we're going to need. My first task pops up right here in B. It says, calculate the real interest rate in the long-run equilibrium. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and move this out of the way. And I'm looking at, I'm going to go ahead and label this B. Hopefully you guys can see my writing. Do I need a bolder pen? Would that be helpful?
No, that's okay.
Okay. All right, so I'm looking at that B question. Calculate the real interest rate in the long-run equilibrium. All right, so what is the real interest rate? Yeah, Zach. Yep, okay, so it's the nominal interest rate. It's the nominal interest rate which we determined is 8%. And we're going to subtract out the inflation rate, which is 6%. And that gives us a 2% real interest rate. Simple enough. I know I've got that point now. I'm confident that I know what the real interest rate is. So that's more of a definitional. If you know the definition, you can get there. I'm going to C. Assume now that the Federal Reserve decides to target an inflation rate of 3%. So are they trying to lower inflation or raise inflation?
Lower.
They're trying to lower it. Very good. What open market operation should the Federal Reserve undertake? All right, so we're talking about using monetary policy here, and they're being very specific. They want us to identify what type of open market operation. So what does that entail? Torin?
Is it selling T-bills?
Buying and selling T-bills is open market operations, and you say sell, I say sell. All right, so they should sell T-bills because once they sell those T-bills, the banks are going to have to give over money. And so that's money supply that's leaving the banking system. So what open market operation should the Federal Reserve undertake? They should sell Treasury bills. All right. Easy enough. I got that point. D. Using a correctly labeled graph of the money market, show how the Federal Reserve's action you identified in Part C will affect the nominal interest rate. So all I'm trying to figure out now is what this would look like on a money market model. If we reduced the money supply, if we sold Treasury bills, what would this look like? So hopefully this is large enough. So for D, I'm going to go ahead and start making my money market. So here we go. I've got quantity of money. And over here I have the interest rate. I'm going to put my demand for money. And then remind me on the money market, how should the supply look? It should, yes, you're right. It should be vertical. So let me just arbitrarily select a spot right here. All right, so this is my money supply. Money supply. And it's vertical why?
It's a finite number of money.
Because it's fixed.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
well, the money's controlled by Fed, so only they can like shift it like in any way.
The money supply is controlled by the Fed, so it's a set fixed, and it'll only change if,
They decide to like sell or buy
right,
treasury bills.
okay. So now I've got my money market here, and I have to show what's going to happen now. So how would this selling of treasury bills affect my money market model? What happens to the money supply? Does it go up or down? Okay, it's going to go down. That's how we're going to solve, that's how we're going to lower inflation. We're going to tighten up the money supply. And since it goes down, we're going to move the money supply line to the left. All right, so this is money supply 2, 1 and 2. So now we have a new equilibrium. I'll call this E1, I'll call this E2. Now they haven't specified how they want me to label these curves. Sometimes they do, and if they do specify, you want to use the labels that they give. But in this one, I don't see anything telling me exactly what they want things labeled, so I'm going to go with the way I know best. All right, just because they don't give you a specific label instruction doesn't mean that you shouldn't label. All right. So I think I've satisfied D. Did I miss some part? Nope, I've shown. And, you know, I see that here, you know, it's telling me to show. Whenever they say show, you know that you've got to either do the math, you need to show the math, the formula, or the model, or whatever. Show that movement happening. All right, so let's move on to E. How will the interest rate change you identified in part D? And how will that interest rate change affect aggregate demand in the short run? So now they're referring back to the ADAS model, the aggregate demand. So now I got to think about what is an interest rate that has increased going to do? Because I see this, we've got, this is our, you know, this is our rate 1. Here's our rate 2. That's clearly an increased interest rate. Let me just, it doesn't tell me I have to show it. In fact, it just wants me to explain it. But I want to verify in my mind that what I'm doing makes sense. So I'm actually going to just do a quick ADAS model. And now I got to think about the shifters on ADAS model. What does an increased interest rate do to GDP?
It lowers like demand, right?
It lowers demand. What sector of the economy do you think that it lowers demand the most?
Investment.
Investment. Beautiful. So now that just thinking about this, we've already kind of formulated how we want to explain our answer. So we're going to see a shift in demands to the left, reduce demand, and in particular we know it's investment because investors depend on interest rates to evaluate whether their projects are really going to be profitable. So I'm going to explain that as succinctly as I possibly can on the fly here. Increased interest rates discourages investment spending. And thus shifts aggregates, I probably misspelled that, demand left, reducing demand and RGDP. Now, I want to look at this real quick, 21, I've answered all parts of the question. So I want to look back over it and just look at the points. How many points were available, and did I get every single one of them? Calculate the real interest rate in the long run. I did that. I think I did it right. C, assume now that the Federal Reserve decides to target an inflation rate of 3%, what open market operations should the Federal Reserve undertake? There's only one direct question. They should sell Treasury bills. I've done that. D, using a correctly labeled graph of the money market. Okay, I've double checked that all of my labels are correct, so I should get the points for those labels. And it asks me to show the action that we identified in C, selling those Treasury bills. So I have a proper model labeled, and then I've gone in and I've shown that shift. I've satisfied D. And then finally for E, I've even double checked myself and written, it wasn't required, but I wanted to make sure I took a look. I've gotten that down, and I've explained exactly why it shifted to the left. So I should have all the points here. Yeah?
Is there a way to abbreviate interest rate?
Here's the thing. You could, I often do just INT dot, but it's best practice to just, on the AP exam, just go ahead and write them out fully. And I know that some of them are very, very long, but best practices is to go full on. Otherwise, you risk running into a grader that hasn't seen that type of notation before. Math notation, things like that, they are all pretty straightforward. Everybody uses the same notation, and if you get it wrong, then people are like, what the hell are you doing? Economic notation does have some variation to it, and still, both ways are right. But if you run into someone who doesn't know that notation, it might hurt you. Yes?
I'm not sure how much this applies, but in human geo, it specifically said that if you ever want to abbreviate something, you have to write it out and then put an abbreviation next to it.
Yeah, if you know you're going to be saying aggregate demand over and over and over again, just say aggregate demand the first time and then AD. That's a great way of signaling to them what notation you're going to be using.
Yeah, I'm human geo.
Vincent?
I thought selling the T-bills would increase the money in circulation, thus increasing money supply, right? But I guess not.
Well, I think you've got it this one backwards. If the Federal Reserve sells the T-bills, then the banks have to pay for those T-bills.
Oh, okay, yeah. Yeah.
Right? So this is like I said when we started talking about T-bills and so forth, open market operations. This is one of those you got to double check your thinking because it's easy to flip-flop them. It's really easy, All right. How do we feel about 21? Everybody understand exactly what I did and why I did it? Beautiful. How about you, Ms. Patel? Do you understand? Okay, good.
Boo. They're all boo. Boo.
All right, so I'm going to move on to the next one. Number 22. So I'll put this up here for a moment. Assume that as a result of increased political instability, investors move their funds out of the country of Terra. All right, so now we've got to see what might be going on here. We're going to go to A. How will this decision, these investors moving their funds out of the country, how will this decision by investors affect the international value of Terra's currency on the foreign exchange market? Now, you guys haven't studied the foreign exchange market yet. That's the last model you guys will learn, the foreign exchange market models. However, I chose to include this question because I think that you can logically kind of figure this portion out. So let's look at it. We got A here. All right. Political instability. People don't have as much faith in the system here. Big investors decide to move their money overseas. How will this decision by investors affect the international value of Terra's currency? I'm going to go with Vincent on this one.
Oh, it decreases it definitely, but it probably increases the value of America's, currency. Because it's more stable and they want to use it probably.
Well, hold on. Let's just say Terra's America because it's easier to remember.
Oh.
Okay, let's say America is the one that is experiencing the political instability,
Right.
and people are all pulling their money out of America. So it's going to decrease the value of the American dollar as compared to other currencies. But why? Torin.
Because there's going to be like surplus of it in the foreign market.
You're right. The supply of dollars to the foreign exchange market has now increased, and that should lower the basically the value of the price. Yes.
But the government, there's not enough confidence that they'll be able to pay back the, bonds. Or is that not even? Because
What bonds?
Well, no, but I'm just saying because there's less trust in the institution that creates that money. So therefore, am I right on this, or am I speaking out of turn?
Vincent, I think that you're overthinking. You're going beyond the scope of the question, which is always dangerous.
Yeah.
Dangerous. Okay, yes.
I was thinking more of the terms of like the assets that the money is controlling. I was thinking like, let's say move all the asset away, the money is like kind of now less valuable because there's less like stuff that is associated with it, and like kind of the demand went down. There's less people using the money for the purpose of like transactions, so like that decreases the power of the currency, isn't it?
A little convoluted in your explanation, so I don't want to say yes or no. What I will say is just at the very basic level here, when we see a question like this, what's happening is that the supply of money and savings and so forth is being shifted to a different country. It's coming out of our banks. So what's that going to do to the amount of loanable funds in our country?
Decreases loanable funds.
It's going to decrease our loanable funds. It's going to increase for some other country. And the other country that they're now investing in has a greater supply of American dollars to go around, which means that the exchange value would go down. We will have a unit on this, but I wanted to at least kind of play with it a little bit, and it helps to segue into the rest, which is the loanable funds market. So what I'm going to say for A is that this decision by investors will affect the international value of, let's say, the dollar will reduce the value of, I'll just put $1 there. I'm going to be a little lazy here. Because it increases